Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm Sarah Eskrich, and I'm just so pleased to see all of your smiling faces on your boxes here on Zoom and share with you a very exciting week that we're having at Democracy Found with the introduction of Final Five voting legislation for federal elections in our state of Wisconsin. So I'm just going to go through some quick welcome guidance here as people continue to join into our Zoom. We are set up as an event here, so you should have at the bottom of your screen the ability to chat in questions as I'm going. I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the legislation, where we're at this week, the process that we anticipate ahead, and our asks for you all. And then we're going to spend the vast majority of our time on Q&A. So please don't hesitate to send in your questions as I'm going, and I'll make sure to do my best to address all of them. So as we let everybody keep joining, I will thank my colleague Star for all of her help in setting this conversation up today. Thank you, Star, for all of your technology assistance. And I also want to thank, I know we've got a couple state legislators with us today who have been supportive of this effort. So I'm trying to look and see you all so I can acknowledge you, but I see Representative Andraka on the line with us today. Thank you so much for being with us. I know Representative Reamer was hoping to join us. He's one of our co-authors of this legislation from Milwaukee. I know.
Hi, Sarah.
Hey, hi, Danny. Great to hear from you.
Great to see you.
Sandy from Senator Kuyenga's office on the line with us today, one of our other co-authors from Brookfield. I'll start with a story about our co-authors because they really are phenomenal. It is a rare occurrence, unfortunately, in the Wisconsin State Legislature these days to have a bipartisan bill introduced. And credit to Senator Kuyenga, Senator Smith, Representative Kurtz, and Representative Reamer. They have worked so closely together to put this bill out to their colleagues, to build bipartisan support every step of the way in terms of being coordinated, being aligned, and knowing that this is an effort that's going to take some time for them to stay together on to help it reach the finish line. So that commitment to bipartisanship is, again, unfortunately, all too rare these days in politics. So I cannot thank them enough for their leadership and their commitment to that degree of bipartisanship through and through. And as you all know, as Democracy Found supporters, that's our commitment to you, that our work is bipartisan, that our supporters cross the political spectrum. We aren't just bipartisan at Democracy Found, we are truly cross-partisan. Democrats, Republicans, independents, everywhere in between, coming together to say, we might not agree on individual politicians or individual policies, but we do agree that we need an electoral system that works, that has the right incentives to deliver results to us in the public interest while governing in Washington, D.C., which is something that we do not see enough of these days. So that's really what Final Five voting aims to achieve. Quick overview of the legislation that we've introduced. It is Final Five voting, meaning it is the combination of a top five single ballot primary and instant runoff voting in the general election. It is specific to federal elections, that being the US Senate and US House elections in the state of Wisconsin. So this idea came out of, it's really the brainchild of our co-founder, Katherine Gehl, businesswoman from Wisconsin, who wrote in her book, The Politics Industry Theory and Report in 2017 with Harvard Business School's Michael Porter, about this problem of misaligned incentives and the fact that we have to focus on the system, on the electoral system itself, first and foremost, to make this change happen. And that's where the solution of Final Five voting comes from. It's been an exciting year for this idea of Final Five voting already. In 2020, Alaska passed the first instance of this combined open primary and instant runoff general election. And the idea came to them in the same way that came to us from Katherine's work on the Harvard Business School report. It was Scott Kendall in Alaska who said, this is it. This is the solution that can really change the results that we're getting in Alaska. And that's why we need to focus on this. Well, that's why we came together in Wisconsin to focus on this, because it created a shared understanding of the problem, and more importantly, a shared understanding of what we can do about that problem to improve the results that we're getting out of Washington, D.C. moving forward. So the big news this week is that our legislative co-authors introduced legislation. That's the first step. You hear us, I'm just going to go through legislative process real quickly. You hear us describe this as circulation, because what the state legislature does is they circulate bills for co-sponsorship. That's the stage that we're in right now. That's why we know that representatives like Representative Devin Draka, who's on the line, are joining us as co-sponsors for this legislation. All of the colleagues of our co-authors have the opportunity to sign on to the legislation during this period, this 2-week period prior to introduction. So in a couple weeks, you'll see for us introduction of this bill with a wider group of co-sponsors. We have our 4 co-authors, Democrat, Republican, and Republican in both chambers of the legislature. And we hope to build that support when we introduce, to have a wider group of legislators co-sponsoring the legislation to help move it forward. So that'll happen in a couple weeks. You'll see some more information from us when that's happening. Next, bills, when they're introduced, they get assigned to committees in both the state Senate and the state Assembly. And then ideally, these bills are brought forward for a hearing. So our goal for this session, a real win for us at Democracy Found this session, would be to have hearings in the Senate and in the Assembly on Final 5 voting for federal elections. It's an opportunity for us to keep building awareness and building support in the state legislature. Hearings are a great opportunity to bring in experts to testify on this, to get feedback, to work through the details, and again, raise that awareness, which is so important for a new concept like Final 5 voting. Ultimately, bills have to get voted out of committee, get voted on in each chamber, passed in both chambers, and then ultimately signed by the governor to be enacted in the state of Wisconsin. We know that there's a long road ahead for us at Democracy Found Action to get to that final passage of a governor signing Final 5 voting for federal elections in Wisconsin. So it might take us a while, and I want to level set with you all that this is going to be a journey. Our legislative co-authors are committed to that journey with us, and we very much appreciate that steadfastness from them and helping us to build the support. So it's really incumbent on all of us to support them by building awareness. This concept is still very new. You all know how powerful Final 5 voting is, but so many people don't. So this introduction of a piece of legislation in the state, first and foremost, is an opportunity for us to continue the conversation and build the support base in Wisconsin, throughout our state, so that leaders all across Wisconsin know what Final 5 voting is and know how powerful it is to changing the results that we're getting out of Washington, D.C., that they know that it's not partisan. It's not intended to even change who gets elected. A red district is probably going to stay red, or a blue district is going to stay blue, but we want to realign those electoral incentives while governing for our federal elected officials so that they have the freedom to do the difficult work that's required to advance legislation that represents the broad interests of their constituents. That's the freedom that Final 5 voting as an electoral system provides for federal elected officials. And again, we have the power to make that change through the state legislature in Wisconsin. And this week was our first and very important step on that journey of legislative action. So in your inboxes, I have already sent to you all who registered in advance today an email. And my ask for you is to look at that email, tailor it, and share it with your friends. It is intended to help us build that awareness amongst other leaders like you, to help them understand what we're doing and join us in supporting this effort. So please do share that. That's my #1 ask for you today. If you would like to be involved in building support and encouraging more legislative co-sponsorship of this effort, we're working to be very coordinated in that. So if you'd like to engage legislatively with your legislator on Final 5 voting, please email me, Sarah@democracyfoundaction.org. You can reply to the email that I sent to you. with your name and your state legislators. If you go to the legislative website, there's a quick, very easy on the homepage, find my legislator link, and I'll send back to you some details about any engagement that we've had to date with your state legislator, talking points a little bit so that you can tailor your outreach specifically to your state legislator and to any interactions that we've had with them so far. It's highly orchestrated, it's very coordinated, and that's because we know how important and sensitive outreach is for success for our efforts. So I do ask that we want you all to be engaged, and we appreciate your engagement. We just want to coordinate that so that it's as powerful as possible. So with that, I want to stop talking at you and start answering your questions. So I've seen some start to come in. Thank you for throwing in Find My Legislators in the chat. That's fabulous. First question. So why are just these two elections covered in the bill? So the two elections, again, are federal elections for US Congress and US Senate. There's both strategic political reasons for that and policy reasons for that. So let me start with the policy reason. Washington, D.C. is broken. We all agree that Washington, D.C. is broken. Congress has an approval rating that really never goes above 20% these days. It's a degree of dissatisfaction we have as a public with Washington, D.C. and the results that we're getting. That allows us to focus our efforts and our support there to start, because we so overwhelmingly across the aisle can agree that that is dysfunctional. So that's the policy reason, the priority of focusing on federal elections. The pragmatic reason is that state legislators get to change these rules for Washington, D.C. That's in their power. They have a responsibility, therefore, to not just complain about, just like us, complain about the lack of results that we're getting for Washington, D.C., but a responsibility to change those electoral systems. I'm not going to tell you all that we don't think Final Five voting is the right electoral system in general. We do. We just are trying to bite off what we can chew and what we can pragmatically achieve at the state legislature right now. And we believe that this is the right path forward to get some traction and to ultimately put together a bill that can make it through the state legislature in the next couple of sessions on Final Five voting for federal elections. Next question. Have these bills been formally introduced, or are they still circulating for co-sponsorship? Thanks, Mark. That question is, we are in our circulation period. So right now we have our confirmed 4 co-authors, Senator Smith, Senator Kooyenga, Representative Kurtz, and Representative Reamer. And we know that we've got other supporters in the state legislature who are signing on as co-sponsors. And as I mentioned, we will be introducing the legislation formally, which triggers that process of assigning it to committee in the next couple weeks. So the deadline for co-sponsorship is, I believe, March 4th. So if you want to coordinate with your legislators sooner rather than later, please do reach out to me. And I can help you identify priorities and any conversations we've had with your state legislators to do that in the most powerful way. That brings us to the next question, which is a great segue. Thanks, Mary, which is to say, in a near perfect process, what's the timeline for this journey? And how does this either align or leapfrog over our highly gerrymandered congressional maps? Again, thanks for the question, Mary. So our goal for passage of this in Wisconsin is that we do it over the next couple cycles. So as you all may or may not be aware, the state legislature operates in 2-year terms. It's a biennial legislature. And every 2 years, there's elections. So we have the opportunity to engage legislatively during that legislative period and engage electorally every 2 years as well. So we believe that this legislative session is really focused on building awareness and building support and keeping the conversation bipartisan. It is incredibly important that this legislation continues the degree of bipartisan traction that we've started with and builds that as we go through the legislative session for it to have a chance of passage in the next couple cycles. That's the timeline that we're ultimately working with. To the point gerrymandering. There's going to be this simultaneous conversation about maps and drawing legislative districts that's happening this year. That is a separate process, but of course it's related to elections. So we are often asked the question, why focus on Final Five voting? Why not focus on nonpartisan redistricting efforts? And to answer that most succinctly, I would say there's incredible power in Final Five voting because it takes the competition from a primary election to a general election. So even in a state where we have significant rural and urban divides, we have districts that are going to be red districts or going to be blue districts, no matter how you draw the maps, there should be a degree of electoral competition and accountability in the general election so that people have freedom at the congressional level to govern. So I always like to use this example, I'll use it again today, but to say, if you're in Congress right now and you're looking at a piece of bipartisan legislation, it is very hard to vote yes on common sense, consensus-oriented legislation because you're likely to face a primary challenge if you compromise. And this system of Final Five voting removes that. It makes it so that the competition, again, is not in the primary, it's in the general election when you've got a wider swath of voters that you're accountable to, and gives elected officials that freedom to do the difficult work. And I would say that's why we've gotten the support from our US Congressman, Mike Gallagher, Republican from Green Bay, for Final Five voting legislation, because he knows that Congress, in order to do the job that he wants to do of serving in Congress well, he needs an electoral system. It would benefit him and his colleagues to have an electoral system that gave them some freedom to do the difficult work of governing. Keep going on questions here. What are major objections, elected officials about their perspective? I would say to respond to some of these questions in group together, the pushback that we often hear on Final Five voting is that it's too complicated, that voters are not going to understand. And first and foremost, that discredits voters, right? Voters are smart. Voters know that they're making calculated decisions when they go in right now. They understand the problem of spoiler votes and wasted votes in elections. And they know when they're being empowered to show their full preference or not. And in states that have implemented similar changes, specifically to the instant runoff portion of the proposal that we're working on, we have not found any significant difference in terms of voter participation, spoiled ballots. Voters are perfectly capable of ranking their choices on a general election ballot, and they say that they prefer it. So that's the number one piece of pushback that we get on this. And it's a very easy one to dismiss based on both the evidence that we know to date and the fact that people can keep voting for just their favorite candidate and their vote still counts, just like it does today. So voters are no worse off under this system than under the system today. All right. Yeah. Excuse me for pausing. I'm just looking through your questions here. Great. So some questions on legislative support for this. I will pause and see if any of our legislators or staff on the call want to jump in. You are welcome to do so. Representative Reamer, are there any kind of feedback that you'd like to provide to people based on what we've been hearing so far?
Yeah, yes, Sarah, thank you. And thanks to everyone for joining the call. I was out for a hike today because of the beautiful weather, and I completely lost track of time, but I had my phone with me, so I was able to jump on this call because I thought it was just really important to be here with all of you. So far, the reception from colleagues has been open-minded, generally positive. I think when you're proposing any significant substantive change to the way that we conduct elections, you're going to come up against, I would say, the natural hesitancy about doing it because of legitimate concerns about making some of those changes. When you stack the arguments that that Sarah talked about and continue to demonstrate evidence that, as most of us know, as elected officials, voters are a lot smarter than they're often given credit for. People make smart, prudent decisions about how to choose their elected officials, but they are constrained by the system that they have to do that in. Pointing to other places where this has been done, or parts of it have been done, and voters continue to participate, maybe participate more fully, and that the new process actually not only brings out more people to participate, but make sure that voters and elected officials have a different kind of relationship. And that has some of the effects for the relationship between elected officials that Sarah's already talked about. Elected officials more willing to collaborate and compromise and get things done for the benefits of the people that they represent and serve. So once you get there, you really start to see neutrality or hesitancy about the idea turn into a positive approach. And we've seen that through the way that a number of folks have signed on to the legislation just already in the last 24 hours.
Fabulous. Thank you, Representative Reamer, and thanks for bringing some sunshine from the outside onto our call. Greatly appreciated. Representative Reamer has been working with us for a long time on this effort. It was really with us early on in the 2 years ago that we started Democracy Found and Democracy Found Action. So thanks to him for his steadfast leadership. A couple questions here on what you all can do as supporters and next steps. So let me be very clear about our strategy. We are very much encouraging you as supporters to share out this message of Final Five voting. We are no longer, for a while we were telling you we are in the quiet phase. We are now in the phase where we need to build awareness, especially across the state of Wisconsin, to our colleagues, our friends, our neighbors, our family members, the people who are leaders in our local communities all across Wisconsin, so that they know about this, that they know what Final Five voting is and they know the power of it. So again, I did include for you all a TED Talk that's 17 minutes in the email that I sent to you. I encourage you to share that TED Talk around, because it's Katherine Gale, one of our co-founders and co-chairs of the effort here in Wisconsin, articulating so clearly in a way that is not articulated when you look at the bill draft. I'll say, quite frankly, looking at state statutes is a little bit mind-numbing sometimes. So it's a great thing to share the TED Talk, because in 17 minutes, you can learn very quickly what Final Five voting is and what it's intended to do. So the idea is, please share that. Please share that via email. Please share it via Twitter. Please share it via Facebook, all other social media accounts. We have Democracy Found has platforms on Twitter and Facebook. We've been sharing things out. Charlene put into the chat here for you all. Please follow us and please share what we're sharing out as you see it with your network, because we're trying to hone in on good key messages that can be shared more broadly. So please follow our lead and go from there in sharing out with your network on social media and your network in real life. Opportunities like this of coming together for Zooms are something that we've also done. So if you have a group that meets regularly or comes together in your community, I've talked to, here's a great example, a group of croquet players in the summer who now, because it's winter and COVID, have not been able to get together outside, are now meeting via Zoom for a conversation once a week, invited me in to have a half an hour conversation about Final Five voting during their friends gathering. Please do share opportunities like that, because now is the time for us to spread the word and the awareness. And I am always more than happy to join you or have someone else from our leadership circle or advisory council, or provide you all with the talking points that you need to support conversations in forums like that. I'm very eager to coordinate that sort of work with you. So please be in touch. Now's the time to share out. I think we've had a couple of additional questions that I can follow up one-on-one with people in the chat for, but I so appreciate your engagement today, and I even more appreciate your continued engagement and support moving forward, because this is the next very important phase on a long journey that we're making together. So it's because of all of you that we are where we are today and have a bipartisan bill that's going to be introduced in the state legislature. And it's up to us to keep moving it forward. Thank you so much.